Hey guys, John Loxa here. So we're back with our audiobook. I don't know if you can hear me. We're back recording the audiobook of Hell and Highwater for the Narcosis book. But today with me is my special guest, Manny. Oh, he's a baby. There he is. I don't know if he'll be sticking around, but we'll see if he wants to go into my lap. And then oh, maybe not. Guess he wants to sit near the mouse. He wants to sit near the mouse. Manny, what are you doing? Do not do that. He's reaching out and he's like, I'm getting the mouse. I'm gonna get it. And then looking at me. It's like his bowl is full of food over there. You leave that alone. You leave that alone. So, oh, what are you doing? Are you moving the mouse around? Okay. Just in order of business real fast. First, two orders of business, I suppose. Just real quick. First, this basically is an audiobook that we're recording here, right? It's a lot harder than I actually expected. That's not to, I'm not trying to fluff myself up or anything like that, but this is actually, I'm recording it over a few days and just, it's hard. It's hard just speaking constantly for, an hour at a time. That takes its toll. Normal, blind playthroughs or playing video games or whatever. Normally you at least have you have pauses. Do you have to do that, Manny? You have pauses. This is just like straight through and just constantly kind of reading the stuff. Do you have to now? I'm gonna maul him vigorously here in a minute. But no, so the people like William Shatner and other actors and voice actors that have done audiobooks, tons of respect for those guys. It's just try it. Seriously, try it. If you have any, if you're curious about how it is at all, just grab a book and just start reading it aloud and do it for an hour. Like that first few chapters of this, my voice got kind of hoarse a little bit. So tons of respect for those guys. And yeah. Now, number two, order of business number two, just because I'm going to forget it otherwise. I got a comment on my YouTube channel earlier today. Not a bad one. It was like, hey, I'm really kind of confused why you don't have that many subscribers. And it was a comment like that. And I just thought about it and I responded, I don't know why. I was like, thank you. First off, thank you for the kind words. But secondly, I don't really know why. But for me, I'm kind of in the mindset of a hobby, and as long as one person likes it, I know that people are having a good time, and that's enough for me. Do you have to keep moving the mouse? Really? You were so crazy. But you were so crazy. But and as dorky as that sounds, it's honestly the truth. Like when I hit the year mark, because I've been doing this a little bit over a year. When I hit the year mark, I was like, why don't I have more than excuse me. Why don't I have more than X number of subscribers? And I was a little annoyed. And then I'm like, you know what? I've only been doing this like a year. If you're starting a new job, like any kind of a technical or a little bit more advanced job, after a year, you're competent, So I kind of thought about it and I'm like, it normally takes me 2 to 3 years before I become like, not competent, but like skilled at whatever the job is. And I figure this will probably be the same. So I kind of was like, you know what, whatever. I went kind of changed my mindset from, man, I've been doing this for a year, to I've only been doing this for a year. So that's kind of my philosophy right now, even though it's people say that all the time, and they're not genuine about it. And hopefully for me it's genuine. That's not to say that I wouldn't mind growing. I wouldn't mind more subscribers and stuff like that. Like, very few people, I would imagine, are going to see this, right? Because we're in the 4th or 5th episode of bonus material for Narcosis, which is a relatively obscure walking simulator underwater horror thing, so it's very few people are going to see this, but I do hope that people enjoy this, which is why I'm doing it. But yeah, as long as people enjoy it, that's kind of the key. I'm just like, whatever. I'm partially kind of accepting that I'm never going to be huge. I mean, as far as like subscriber count, I'm not going to be like PewDiePie or Markiplier or any of those guys. And I'm just like, you know what? That's okay. That's okay. I mean, I'm not, what I've gained from this is a improvement in character. At least I think so. It's gotten me to, kind of look at myself and see that there's areas that I need to improve and can grow in. And, just change my mindset about that sort of stuff, and that itself is like, money can't buy that, like when they talk about like money not being able to buy happiness, that's kind of what I'm talking about in a weird way. It's like, I don't know. It's like, what would you pay to do something better, or to be happier, or it's like along those lines. The insights that doing this YouTube stuff has brought me, I honestly don't know how you'd get that normally. So when I say, like, I'm happy when I just did Cthulhu Saves the World, right? And another super obscure, or relatively obscure, indie game from like 2011, like 8 years ago. And as I'm posting each video, I see 2 or 3 people viewing it. I just see the views, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. As I'm putting it out there, people are watching it. And that makes me happy, because people are, I mean, if they didn't enjoy it, they certainly wouldn't watch like 14 or 15 hours of it. So, same thing with this. But anyway, that's my spiel. I've taken up about, a little bit under 10 minutes now with my, whatever this is, not ranting, but philosophizing, I guess. But I do want to thank you guys as well, because that's what it's all about, really. As long as you guys are liking this, that's what I want. That's what I want. So, super cheesy, but but also, Manny is a super bad influence on Jack, because he sits here by the mouse when he wants to get fed, and Jack's been doing that lately as well. So let me take another little sip of my beer. It's a Belgian triple. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly or not. It's another one that's up there in alcohol percentage. It's like 8 something or 9. And then let's get on with this. So we're at page 44 out of 70. A little bit over halfway. And we have probably 2 episodes left, give or take. This one and another one. Which will actually put it at about the length of the game itself, for what that's worth. So, by the way, the game was amazing. If somehow you're here and you didn't watch the game or play the game, awesome. Very awesome. Okay. Chapter 9, Walking Coffin. I don't know what sort of relationship Dr. Vanderoe and JB had before the accident, but I know they weren't especially close. They worked on different teams. She stayed mostly inside the hab, he typically went out, but their interactions had recently taken on a specific flavor. It was a closeness born from the surviving all this, a shared understanding of inescapable loss and despair. Also, Manny is right here so I can pet him as we're reading. There was nothing you could have done, John. Nothing at all. None of us knew this would happen. The doctor knelt close to JB, speaking softly, but conspicuously not laying a hand on him. He shook his head, wiping his cheek before crossing his arms. He stared into his lap, silent, save for the ragged breathing that belied the intensity of his grief. The return ride to Compass 1 was unusually rocky. It felt as though the AI guidance system was drunk. Our diving suits, now fastened to the walls, shifted like coat hangers in an empty closet. Although the sub was moving faster than before, all seemed fine until we took a harsh dip, knocking the three of us off balance. A frantic beeping from the front of the sub broke the silence. Concern in her eyes, Dr. Vanderoe moved carefully to check the front terminal. The beeping became louder and more rapid, like a metal detector honing in on its prize. I joined her at the sub's terminal, leaving JB in the rear. Before I could ask what she'd learned, violent impact rocked the sub, stopping us dead in our tracks. The doctor and I were sent sprawling against the front wall. JB, still at the rear, was bashed up against the back wall, and then flung forward, leaving him clutching his head and moaning. The sub tilted forward, sending us sliding across the wet metal grating. Another collision, louder now, could be felt from the port side, and then the sub lurched to one side. Screaming ensued, then the screech of metal on metal, and jets of water punched through widening fissures. Total chaos. The diving suits failed like crash test dummies in a simulated car accident. Still fastened to the walls, they banged back and forth, booming mallets on a metal drum. With a sound like splitting wood, one of the suits broke free from its straps, crushing JB's legs. He didn't see it coming, never stood a chance. The beeping from before was joined by a nightmarish cacophony of new sounds, an emergency siren, JB's agonized cries, and the sound of rushing water. All hell had broken loose, and in less than half a minute. Another blast of seawater narrowly missed my neck. Man, and I just had some coffee, too. It's late, though, so, lights flickered, and then the sub suffered its final collision as it shuddered down onto the seafloor. Mercifully, we'd landed right side up. The doctor and I stood, dizzy and in shock, and checked the console. We'd hit something large, that much was clear, but what it was we couldn't say for sure. Now this is where it diverges again from the game, because I believe as we were going out, that's when we got like a radio message from the other team. They're like, we're on the track, blah blah blah, or we're headed back, or something along those lines. Or, I mean, actually, they did say, hey, we're heading back, so maybe it's, maybe it does match. Who can say? We raced to JB's aid. Amazingly, both the doctor and I seemed to only have suffered cuts and bruises. Our most seasoned diver was not so fortunate. Both of his legs were visibly shattered, and his right arm was set at an unnatural angle. There was a terrible wound on his head, and he was coughing up blood. Though the ADS had shifted off of him by the time the sub had settled, he wasn't going anywhere. Against all odds, the man was still conscious. With a measured look and superhuman composure, he scanned the flooding sub before bringing his eyes to rest on us. He swallowed, and then, incredibly, began issuing orders. Get in the suits. The doctor made a distressed sound, a sort of low moan. We all knew what had to be done, but that didn't lessen the dread. In truth, I'd say JB, even near death, knew what had to be done. So bittersweet that the one who'd never leave the sub was the one driving us on, reminding us what we needed to do if we wanted to survive. Get in the damn suits, both of you. It wasn't the voice of a man about to die. The hull groaned, followed by another bang, massive but muffled, as one of the sub's reinforced ribs buckled. I mean it. You stick around here to die, and I'll kill you. Even on the verge, he was still JB through and through. The doctor was kneeling, trying to bring some sort of comfort, if not hope. But he was right. We had to get poured in and out of the sub. She moved to cradle his head in her hands, but JB persisted. Just get in the suit, Cora. Please. So just think of that. Every time I've flubbed one of these lines, which is about, every 4 or 5 of them, I'd have to redo it for the audiobook. So, man, those guys they're machines, right? And I mean that with ultimate respect. I bashed on the keypad controlling the mechanism that opened the suits and clambered in. I unbuckled the straps, and with a loud metallic whir and a series of pops, the upper half was unfastened and lifted a few feet above. Mind and body in conflict, Dr. Vanderoe backed away from JB's mangled body, tears streaming down her face. His blood mixed freely with the seawater that gushed down and pooled in the sub's nose. She never took her eyes off him as she prepped the ADS opposite me. I don't know if it's because he'd coaxed us into suits or the rising water, but it was only then that JB allowed himself to break. My fault, JJ was there. His voice grew weaker by the moment. Saw the schedule. His face was losing color. I sent him down there, gave him the extra assignment. So sorry, son. I'll be seeing you soon. The encroaching ocean made those his last words. It all happened unceremoniously. The water was, as always, brutally indifferent to the weight of a man's life. It simply took him. Dr. Vanderoe's sobs were cut off as the halves of both our suits came together with resounding clunks. The crew had always called them walking coffins with a wink and a smirk. Morbid humor now made all too vivid. I could faintly make out her face through the lucite, her tear-soaked cheeks and chin dimly lit by the helmet. But I couldn't see her eyes. The suit systems came online, thankfully still networked with the sub. I initiated the lockout chamber sequence, which accelerated the flooding in the rest of the sub as the pressure equalized. Next, I overrode the nearby terminal, ironically warning us to not flood the chamber until the inner door was closed. Another warning ensued, this one about increasing air pressure, the least of my worries. Even though the suit had largely muffled the blaring mixture of alarms, it was still remarkably difficult to think straight. The sub was now completely one with the ocean. Debris swirling around us, I tried to raise the doctor on the radio. I could hear labored breathing, but no reaction otherwise. And then the sub buckled, the left side shearing violently open. The tear left behind was big enough to squeeze through, so we made a break for it. Me behind the doctor, pushing her forward. During all the confusion, our focus hadn't been on what hit us, just making it out alive. Even though I had a suspicion, I only learned for sure what had happened weeks later. We'd collided with the shuttle that serviced the two HABs. So this is interesting because I thought they said something about not being able to recover any bodies. If they couldn't recover any of the bodies, how did they find all the debris and stuff? I mean, I guess maybe the bodies got eaten, but there'd still be bones or something. The shuttle was basically our commuting bus, moving back and forth between Compass 1 and 2, bringing equipment and personnel back and forth. Post-mortem investigations revealed that the shuttle had been powered back on after energy from Compass 1 had been diverted and was en route to Compass 2. In our attempt to try and rescue whoever it was back at the HAB, we'd somehow met in the middle, cutting both trips catastrophically short. During the cleanup effort, the search team canvassed the field for bodies but only found the ruined empty tram. The search was equivalent to the proverbial needle in a haystack. Though both the main habitats and surrounding modules were located within a well-designated perimeter, there was a lot of ground to cover. With only a team of divers and ADSs using remotely operated vehicles, some conclusions were hard to come by. The sub had come to rest on the edge of a deep precipice. It was at least a 30-foot drop, so we were careful in backing away from it. I signaled to the doctor, but she still wouldn't answer. Fearing she might have slipped into unconsciousness, I was relieved when she finally turned towards me, but her eyes were wide, her face visibly drenched. Maybe I should go with water instead of beer. Dr. Vanderoe, can you hear me? I leaned in as much as the suit would allow. Our eyes locked for a moment, but what I saw suggested she no longer recognized me. She backed away from the sub, pushing me aside. I tried to communicate, to comfort her, but I've never been any good at that sort of thing. I guess I just hoped that hearing the sound of my voice would help. Listen, we need to stay close. There was nothing we could have done. We can still make it to Compass 2. Right, so I guess they said, she went crazy or, temporary insanity or something like that. They didn't specifically say, but, he said she broke. Our rescue plan was a bust, and at this rate we might not even be able to save ourselves. The only course of action was to proceed on foot. In doubling back to the lab, we'd have to make up the distance. Our O2 was in standard supply, 2 canisters each, good for a few hours. I led the way as we set out across an alien landscape, peppered with hydrothermal vents emitting scalding seawater and sediment. Called black smokers, they're only known to appear in the deeper ocean trenches. My companion remained silent, but at least I wasn't alone. Best case, we could have been 2.5 miles away from Compass 2. Doesn't sound far, but in titanium bodysuits moving at a rate of roughly 90 meters per hour, it was a daunting proposition. They mentioned miles, and then they switched to meters. Oh, there's Manny. So I have no idea. 90 meters per hour is... I have no idea. It's not good. 90... So it's like 3 foot 5 inches per meter. So 90, like 270, about 300 feet. 300 feet per hour. Is that right? 300 feet per hour, give or take. And then 2.5 miles. A mile is like 5,000 feet. So about 15,000, no, like 12,000 feet, give or take. 12,000 and you're going 300 feet per hour. Yeah, that's not so good. That's not so good. Especially when you only have 2 hours of air, right? So you can go like 600 feet. It's not great. We weren't exactly moving at a turtle's pace, but the suits weren't designed for long distance hikes such as this, factoring in unfriendly terrain like the trench that lay before us, and it became clear we'd have to push the suit's limits as well as our own. If JB were here with us, he'd have come up with another solution. He knew the terrain and the best possible way to get through it, but he wasn't. And as we wound our way in silence between the streams of sediment and boiling water bursting forth from the earth, I couldn't help but miss him. Try and try again, Chapter 10. We can make it to Compass 2. Dr. Vanderoe didn't respond. The deeper we waded into the smoker's field, the more unnerved I became. Of course we will, I thought to myself. We'll hit setbacks, but when we do, we'll try and try again. I'd even outlined a detailed scenario of what would happen once we got there, but that was a plan for later. We were in a rough spot, and my companion's reticence made it worse. I checked my O2 meter and noticed it was depleting unusually quickly. A damaged sensor, maybe. More likely a leak in the rebreather. I needed the doctor's help to inspect it, but given her current state, it would have to wait a little longer. Nothing else to do, nowhere to go. My oxygen had already dropped to 56%. Either we'd find some means of escape, or the next destination would be our last. As the two of us trudged along the rocky valley, we came across several boxes and containers from the hab littering the field. One of these was a compressor used to refill oxygen tanks, most likely thrown clear from the shuttle. The timing couldn't have been better. It was a small, merciful windfall amidst so much that had been lost. I quickly ejected the near-empty O2 bottle from my rebreather. A warning appeared, counting the minutes and seconds I had left to live unless I inserted a replacement. I clicked the new bottle into the empty slot. My meter jumped back to 100%. I counted the seconds, hoping the leak might simply be due to a faulty seal with the previous canister. You'd think you'd have 2 canisters, right? So you'd empty one first, and then you'd switch the other, and then you could take the empty out and switch it. Just a thought, especially with the triple redundancy. Or you should have triple redundancy, right? Although maybe not with the suits. Maybe the triple redundancy is for the habitat. Let's see. No such luck. I was still burning through oxygen several times faster than normal. Definitely the rebreather then. I asked the doctor to take a look, knowing full well she was only half accounted for. Dr. Vanderoe, we need to examine our suits. They might be damaged. When I looked through her grimy visor, I could see the eyes of a broken woman. She had been trailing behind me like a child after an older sibling. Listless, if not entirely lost. She kept walking. Dr. Vanderoe, your rebreather might be damaged like mine. I need to inspect the suits for damage. She didn't stop, walking right past me instead. So I glided past her with the pump jets and blocked her path. She stood there, silent and unmoving. I toggled the lamp on my shoulder on and off, desperate for some sort of response. Dr. Cora, robot. That got her attention. She shot me an irritated glare, but nodded in consent. It wasn't much, but at least I was getting through. She circled around, slowly sweeping her lights over the contours of my suit in search of dents, punctures, or any other cause for concern. She found nothing wrong. I asked her to look again, but she assured me that was fine. As she stepped away from me, I noticed the battered, bruised back of her ADS. 3 of the 4 battery pods mounted at the suit's hips had been mangled beyond recognition during the crash. How much power have you got left? I asked. She was more cooperative now and read back 25% over the radio. Far too low. I asked her to confirm, which she did, but it wasn't nearly enough to make it. The single biggest drain was from the comfort heater, but if the remaining battery were to run flat, it was a toss-up whether she'd die first from the cold or CO2 poisoning from the lack of oxygen. My O2 meter was now reading 94%. A 6% drop in 20 minutes was far too fast. Without core power running to the motors, which recirculate air through the suit's soda-sorb cartridge, I knew it would take at most 20 minutes for her to pass out, and another 10 before she was beyond saving. But there was nothing I could do, and after briefly but intensely weighing the options, I concluded that it wouldn't change anything. I decided not to tell her. Yeah, that's kind of shitty. But hope, man. I had no idea how far we were from Compass 2. There's little by way of reference points in the silent darkness, which in turn plays havoc with your sense of time. I do know that it had been nearly an hour since leaving the crash site. I felt as though our destination could be over the next rise. Or if not that one, the next. And of course it wasn't. And as it turned out, Dr. Vanderoe gave out before her failing batteries. I was edging my way carefully around some convoluted mineral formations when she shrieked, startling me. It took me a second to turn around and train my lights on the cause. It was a flurry of tentacles, maybe the size of a small dog, a cuttlefish, perhaps, though bigger than any I'd seen, attracted by her suit's lights, or possibly the heat emanating from the suit itself. It had attached itself to her faceplate. You heard about it happening from time to time, most often courtesy of the Castillo brothers, returning from EVA with yet another knee-slapping tale. More annoying than dangerous, they'd say. Whether Cora had heard these stories or not, their wisdom evaded her. Her I don't know if Manny's thrown up over there or not. I just heard the sound, and we'll have to go see in a minute. Whether Manny likes to eat until the point where he throws up. He's a glutton. Not always, but a lot of the time he'll do it if you feed him too often, basically. Let's see. Her distorted screams deafened me as she stood in place, clumsily trying to bat the creature away, kicking up whirls of sediment in the process. I shouted at her to shut down her lights, but she was beyond listening. There was no hope of grabbing it. Marvel of technology though it may be, the ADS is lacking when it comes to dexterous precision work. The screaming made it nearly impossible to think. After a few futile moments, I stepped back to gain some distance and fired a flare. It struck the creature, and in the blink of an eye, it detached itself from the doctor's visor, vanishing into a thick, inky cloud. The entire encounter had taken less than a minute, but my nerves were on end with adrenaline. The doctor's screaming had subsided. She was now leaning against a mineral spire, looking like a boxer on the ropes. This was my last moment with Cora, when she was still alive. I regretted that I had insulted her, called her a robot. In scenarios such as this, all semblance of prestige and decorum disappear. She wasn't a doctor or even a colleague anymore. We were just two people, frightened and lost at the bottom of the sea. Nothing I did made any difference. She was inconsolable, past the point. Although she did not speak, I could hear a strange sound coming across the comms. With dawning horror, I realized what was making it. She was writhing, banging her head against the faceplate, forwards and backwards, then side to side, emitting a low, raspy moan. The weight of everything that happened had finally broken her. I do not recall the details, only glimpses of trying to snap her out of that manic state. I tried to remind her of our mutual goal, our life on the surface, her fiancé, but I couldn't reach her. Her suit lights died first, followed by her HUD, its reflection on the faceplate illumining her pale cheeks, flickering before it vanished. Her comms fell silent, nothing I could do. My O2 was down to 78%. I had to leave her, or else die with her. The mineral formations ahead of us looked like a pathway, beckoning me forward. It was then and there that I made that fateful decision. I moved closer, leaned down as much as I could, and clumsily extracted one of the unspent O2 canisters from her suit before moving on. Okay, so they do have multiple canisters. One foot in front of the other, in front of the other. My brain had wrestled my heart into submission, keeping it pinned lest I decide to double back. I could still hear the echo of her in my suit. Hot tears trickled down my cheeks, pulling at my chin. Cora was gone, and I was alone. Yeah, but I mean, you gotta, you have to save yourself. It's shitty. Also, a lot of the quotes, like in the game as you play the kind of the narrator, comes from this. Not entirely, but they talk about the open air thing, and that's kind of what they're talking about. Chapter 11. No manual for that. My breathing was too quick and shallow, even without accounting for the damage regulator. Controlling your burn rate becomes second nature to veteran divers, but try as I might to think of anything else, there was only Cora thrashing in her suit. We were trained to use thought exercises to calm ourselves, conjuring pastures of gently swaying grass perhaps, but my mind was impervious to meditation. To regain my composure, I fell back on the familiar. I returned to the list, which was now in desperate need of revision. I'd managed to keep breathing, and I knew my destination. Compass 2, But after what had happened to Cora and JB, even the best course of action felt tenuous. I can handle pain and hardship. Emotional duress is more difficult, but still manageable. Careful, deliberate rationalism tends to suffice to cover those bases. What I can't handle is losing my concentration. That's when you end up doing things you regret. Trudging through that difficult landscape in that bulky suit, I felt like a B-movie monstrosity, shuffling about in search of my next victim. But I was just a man, vulnerable, humiliated, and confused, and in every shadowed crevice I saw Cora's anguished face. I was far from my destination, dangerously low on oxygen, and in need of proper direction. I stopped in place, an all too familiar lack of options highlighting the immediacy of the situation. Cursing aloud, I was startled by the sound of my own voice, rusty, parched, and, above all, far away. Distant. I closed my eyes in an attempt to remind myself of the truth. There was nothing I could do. My voice is getting a little raspy. It's allergies. It's a horrible thing to try and rationalize death, especially for one who's been taken too soon. You go to places you'd least expect in search of absolution, reasons, regret, guilt. I should have known that her suit was damaged before leaving the sub. I've been told many times over to forgive myself, but there's no manual for that. I'm an engineer. I assess and solve problems. Yet when it mattered most, I'd failed to notice something so completely critical, and then it was already too late. Well, I mean, I guess you could have checked the suits real fast before you got in them, but at that point, you had to get in super fast, so you didn't really have a lot of time. I was a tempest in a tin can, raw human emotion pent up in a walking coffin, raging wildly in the darkness. But still my resolve remained. I had to continue on to make it back to the surface. To lose my mind in such a place, alone and in the dark, was unthinkable. It made no sense for me to give up. But as I would find out, seclusion in adverse environments can have strange effects on you. There's not a lot I can't fix with the right set of tools. But if they break, what then? In other circumstances, I've usually had some sort of experience to fall back on. Not this time. The loss of Cora, JB, and Kincaid was taking its toll, making this trek all the more exhausting. I continued to struggle keeping thoughts hitched to the task at hand. It was dark, foggy, and the suit's lights only traveled so far, but for a brief moment I swear I saw another diver wandering in the distance. It's like all the specters your mind conjures, gone before you can blink, but you're already convinced. Deep down, I knew there was nothing ahead of me. I mean, sure. Because Virgil was behind him at this point, I believe. Unless it's the grandfather. Still, I moved ahead looking for footprints in the sediment. I was convinced it wasn't real, but when you couple stress with the subconscious desire to see something you truly want, it can push you to do questionable things. I wrestled with my growing frustration. Even with my training, the technology, and the list, it was hard to stay centered. My limits were being tested, and this was the final exam. Insulated from the elements by a man-made shell, relying on the selfsame human engineering, which hadn't kept the habitat I left behind from becoming an expensive tomb. Just another thought I had to push to the back of my mind. More pressing matters required my attention. I came to a ravine flanked by rocky outcroppings. Given how flat, rigid, and wide they were, it felt safe to walk across them in order to avoid going the long way around. They resembled the ridges along the upper half of a lava tube, where cooling magma snags on the sides and solidifies. There was no telling how deep. I shined... Excuse me. I tried shining my light down there, but beyond 30 feet or so, the walls of the ravine faded into black fog. I launched one of my flares into the chasm. It tumbled end over end into the jagged maw, growing smaller and smaller until the light vanished. A school of pale fish whipped past me like a flock of birds changing direction mid-flight. 100 feet in, I began to question my decision to chance the ravine. More than once I felt the ledge fracture beneath my foot. If I fell in, the suit would implode long before I reached bottom. The ADS's pump jets only allow short bursts to conserve battery that the life support system relied on. The jets are underpowered but invaluable, and I was about to realize their true utility. During pump jet training, it's tough to keep the smile off your face. Excuse me. It's tough to keep a smile off your face, though it hadn't been a skill I'd used during my handful of real-world EVAs. But at the ravine, in a situation where my life depended on it, one giant leap kept me on track. The ravine's outcropping came to an abrupt end. It had tapered slightly, making the jump somewhat narrower. I didn't have enough oxygen left to go back the way I came, so I decided to risk the jump. With a quiet whoosh and the whine of motors, the suit's 4 pivoting pump jets carried me up and over the yawning chasm. Landing on the opposite rock ledge, my relief exploded into panic as it crumbled under my weight. Before I could even process what was happening, I'd landed on another ledge 20 feet below. The boots of the ADS, while impressively low resistance, feature at least one serious flaw. They can twist more than 180 degrees. The impact twisted my boot sideways and I cried out in pain. Gingerly straightening my leg, I felt a sense of relief. As far as I could tell, nothing was broken. My knee, shin, and ankle throbbed intensely, however, and it wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Not knowing how badly I injured my leg was more distracting than the actual pain. Heart beating and chest on fire, I carefully walked a steep slope towards the top of the ravine. I lingered there, overlooking the expanse, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. By that point, roughly 40% of my oxygen remained. In retrospect, it's occurred to me I often fall back on logic as a coping mechanism of sorts. Under stress, I gravitate towards things like facts, deductions, and experiences in order to keep myself in control. Like they say, it's all in the details. I suspect that's why my mother was a bookworm, always chasing after new ideas. The lecture hall was where she always had complete control. Her affection for me always felt distant, which I suppose fed my longing for her approval. We never really bonded, due to the importance she placed on self-reliance. A great skill to have, but it was always clear to me that I did a lot of self-parenting because of it. I knew that she had difficulty with human interaction and retreated into her studies as a coping mechanism. I know I can be the same way, but I feel that I've made something of my life on my own terms. After I regained my breath and nerves, I continued along the ravine. I recalled the ravines veered near Compass 2. I just hoped I was heading the right way. I focused on my destination, the number of steps I'd walked since my last rest stop, anything to keep my mind on something real. Overlooking the ravine had given me a sense of how far I had come. Only an hour had passed since Cora. There was no alternative but to keep going. I can think of very few things crueler than death in total isolation. It's not the natural way. Better to be a drop in the pond, afloat as much pain as possible, grief rippling across support networks, the shock and sadness ebbing, until you finally reach the shore. When it's all concentrated onto one single soul, the stress mounts easily to an unfathomable severity. Hopefully that was okay. I mean, I'm all stuffed up and my throat's kind of dry and beer's not really helping, I guess. Okay, how long is this one? 12. Not too long. Let's do number 12. I'm gonna have some of that spicy tea after this, I think. Try and clear out my passages before I do the next episode. Alright, number 12, terrible things. Nearly an hour had passed since the ravine. It was beginning to look like I'd run out of air before getting anywhere near the hab. The terrain was flat and less treacherous now, but I couldn't help shake the feeling I might have gotten turned around somehow. My anxiety and exhaustion were increasing with every step. I considered using the pump jets to give my sore leg a rest, but a botched landing in the ADS could be catastrophic. So I kept my feet on the ground and counted my meager blessings. The internal scrubbers were still keeping my air fresh, the batteries were still doing their job. Hard to believe, but things could actually be worse. It was when I came across the methane pipeline that I could finally confirm I was headed the right way. I let out a laugh of excitement, consuming oxygen I could ill afford. I didn't know how far away I was, of course, but there was a path. There was a path. One that would definitely, if eventually, lead me to Compass 2. Proofreading required. The pump jets lifted me up and onto the pipeline, which was coated with a mixture of accumulated sand and collapsed rubble. Compared to earlier, the trek was serene. Gently sloping dunes to either side, accented with the occasional flurry of curious fish. My knee and ankle were aching, but you can't limp in an ADS. I awkwardly hobbled until the pain subsided enough for me to put my full weight on the leg. Just then I was startled as a large silhouette came into view. Just an abandoned mining robot. Most of the ROVs, remotely operated vehicles I've worked with, are just rectilinear clusters of battery pods, syntactic foam blocks, ballast tanks, and robotic arms. But typical mining robots can be upwards of 20 feet tall, absolute beasts, all of them. We didn't see any of those, as far as I know. The one before me was a bucket wheel excavator. On the end of a long hydraulic arm, similar to that of a backhoe, was a pair of motorized rollers lined with angular titanium teeth. The rollers grind up deposits of rare earth or precious metals usually found near geothermal vents. Now, covered in marine growth and shrouded in darkness, it seemed more a creature of the deep than an abandoned relic of mankind's hubris. May as well just polish it off. Try and make it. In that, Kip and I have in common. We're trying to make it. Terrible, I know. In the deeper parts of the ocean, aquatic life can grow quite large, referred to as deep-sea gigantism. The conditions at extreme depths give rise to countless organisms that would spook even the most seasoned divers. But these beasts are rarely terribly active. There simply isn't enough energy at this depth to sustain the metabolic needs of an energetic predator. Instead, you get opportunistic scavengers. Large but fragile, slow-moving shadow dwellers. I noticed a lone crab perched on the nearby pipeline. It was small and didn't move, apparently unperturbed by my lumbering suit and the light it was giving off. A low oxygen warning beeped on my HUD at 2%. Ooh, that's bad. Like a boiling kettle, time seemed to accelerate when you're not paying it any mind. I quickly replaced the empty O2 canister with the one I'd taken from Cora and allowed myself the luxury of a few deep breaths. I was good for the time being, but it was the last tank I had. Nevertheless, I felt optimistic. The ROV's presence indicated I was within a mile of Compass 2. A bit of a hike in my present state, but absolutely doable. And so, letting the sleeping beast lie, I pressed on, moving past the field and approaching a hilly area. The elevation gave me some perspective, only not in the way I expected. I remember the sense of anticipation as I made my way up one of the larger hills. Feast on that one, Rich Evans of Red Letter Media. I can't pronounce words either. Although, to be fair, in his defense, he, on the best of the worst stuff, he drinks, well, presumably way more than I do. The pipeline I had been following had since disappeared into the sediment. I just wanted to see something, anything, that might indicate which way to go next. When I reached the top of the rise, my heart sank. Even my relatively muted expectations, it seems, were too lofty. A vast, flat expanse peppered with rocks stretched out before me. But there was no sign of the hab. I'm often asked about the low points, the worst of the worst, terrible things, and often, after that, implied, if not spoken, the question, did you ever consider suicide? I will admit that at this point I did. But it was academic, not emotional. Even though my spirits were at their lowest, I never believed I had no recourse. As long as I was still breathing and capable of putting one foot in front of the other, there was hope. But I won't deny that I thought in detail about what I'd need to do to end it all, if it ever came to that. Simply opening up the ADS wasn't an option, and I lacked the help and equipment I'd need to actually extricate myself from it. Spying some rocks, I wondered if going face first into them with the jets engaged might shatter the visor. If it did, I'd be liquefied in seconds from head to toe. Then a surer solution occurred. I could double back to the ravine and simply walk off the ledge. It would take some time, but it could be done. Just a few steps, and then gravity and water pressure would do the rest. I'd wade out and drift downwards, and after some time the ADS would implode, at which point I'd be simultaneously crushed and torn apart. Wouldn't feel a thing. Suppressing the urge to press blindly forward, I doubled back down the hill. My first thought was to make my way back to the ROV, but as soon as I reached the bottom, I realized I'd lost track of my surroundings. The darkness and my limited vision made backtracking akin to guesswork. For the first time, I felt truly lost. At the bottom of the hill, my O2 read 98%. My hopes of finding another tank? Close to zero. Distance to Compass 2? I had no idea. I was angry. Not that my hopes had been dashed, but frustrated at my inability to decide what to do. Statistically speaking, it was unlikely that I'd ever reach the end of the list. The only agency I had left, it was starting to seem, was whether to go now or let it all linger. I'd seen the latter, and I wanted no part of it. But as for giving up, I wanted that even less. I kicked my feet across the sediment like a petulant child, stirring up clouds of silt. I needed to hurt something, to feel superior, if just for a moment. My eyes were puffy, tears stinging them anew. When I felt my legs scrape metal, I stopped cold. Moments passed before I tapped my foot again. This time I heard and felt a slight thud echoing through my suit. Moving a few steps back, I trained my lights more precisely on the patch of sand. Clumsily, I scraped away at the sand with my boot, and what I saw immediately pierced my feelings of utter uncertainty. With each second, I was starting to feel more at ease, but even this silver lining had a touch of gray. It wasn't the same pipeline as before, but it would lead me back to Compass 2. The corroded metal tube ran parallel to the hill, vanishing off into the distance. It was the best and only lead I had. It would have been so easy to give up, to simply sink into the sand and die. I had no family waiting for me on the surface, and my friends down here were gone. And yet my psyche was determined to rebuild itself, something I'd never realized it could do. I've always feared that giving into emotion would be the end of me. Ironically, that's what saved me. In the frigid black depths, I found some hidden reserve of strength. Just enough to continue on. Alright, we are going to stop here. Anyway, thank you guys for your time and attention for today. I really do appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoy these. I have no idea if doing this little audiobook thing is good. I figure it's part of the DLC, so why not, right? I would have read it myself, if you guys would have read it yourself, great. If not, it's here for the people that want to read it, or listen to me read it, or mute me and read it themselves, you know what I mean? But that's definitely it for today. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this, and I hope to see you guys next time. Till then, guys, take care.